Khouri, who's the Director of Global Engagement at the American University of Beirut. He joins us live now from Boston. Rami, first of all, if I can just get your reaction to this news about the extension. So much speculation about it yesterday and today, and now it's finally been announced. So, yeah, just give us your reaction first off.
My reaction is that both sides feel that they are gaining something that is valuable and meaningful to them, and therefore they're going ahead with this extension. They also both need time to figure out what to do next, as does the United States, which is an important player now in this, and everybody else around the world who might be interested in figuring out how do we prevent the situation from returning to what it was either before October 7 or before the last 4 days. So people are both benefiting from this, and it's important to use this time to figure out how to do what the Israelis have always refused to do, which is, and the Americans also, and the British, how to try to resolve this conflict, this century-old conflict, which started in 1923 was 100 years ago, and that's when the League of Nations gave a mandate to Great Britain to run the land of Palestine, and Great Britain then created the conditions to create a Jewish state, which became Israel. So 100 years this conflict has been going on, and people have to look at the historical context. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen. So this is one of the great, I think, gains, political gains that people see in the current situation, that the entire world is supporting ending the Israeli attack, supporting a ceasefire, and supporting the quest for a permanent political resolution that's fair to both sides, to Israel and to the Palestinians.
I mean, as you say, it's a very long history between the two sides, and what's been agreed today is an extension of 2 days to what was a 4-day ceasefire. How likely do you think it is that this 2 days might materialize into something longer, especially given some of the quite belligerent language we've heard from Netanyahu over the weekend when he decided to visit Gaza?
Well, I think you can take anything that Netanyahu or any political leader says with a grain of salt, especially in the heat of battle. What's more important is where is the center of gravity of the political system, and what kind of impact does public sentiment have on the political decision makers. Netanyahu is unlikely to stay as prime minister for very long, so I wouldn't pay too much attention to his bellicose statements. The reality is that a majority of Israelis and a majority of Palestinians would prefer a negotiated, permanent, fair resolution of their conflict to perpetual warfare and violence as we're seeing now, especially given what we've seen from Israel in the last 7 weeks or so, this barbarian medieval siege and starvation policies, which the United States and Great Britain have directly supported, clearly, explicitly saying Israel needs time to achieve its legitimate goals. So this is incredible to see two big global imperial former and current powers who were very much responsible for the creation of the Arab-Israeli conflict by allowing a Zionist plan to create a Jewish state happen at a time when that land in Palestine was about 95% Arab. Now it's about 80% Israeli Jewish. So these two big powers continue to tell the Israelis, go ahead, keep killing, keep destroying society. This is quite extraordinary, and this will have to be at some point addressed by the International Criminal Court and other pertinent bodies. So I think we're really looking at a potentially decisive moment of change, but this change is going to happen very slowly. It's not very easy, as we know from the last 40 years, not very easy to create a comprehensive and credible negotiation between Arabs and Israelis. We had one in Madrid 30 years ago or so, and it's possible that something like that might happen again. But a critical point here is that the Zionist philosophy of Jewish control exclusively in all of Palestine has to change. The American philosophy of allowing Israel to do what it wants and not be held accountable internationally has to change. Those two things are the main roadblocks. The Arabs have given the Israelis everything they've asked for, everything they've demanded from the Palestinians and the Arab world: recognition, demilitarized state, peaceful relations. Whatever Israel has asked for and the Americans asked for has been provided by the Arabs. So we have to keep our eyes on Israel and the United States, which are two rather dysfunctional political systems, and this is one of the big problems that we're witnessing.
I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about US influence in Israel. You were saying that, certainly at the beginning, it seemed very much that the US was giving Israel the go-ahead. That said, yesterday, very clearly from US President Joe Biden, saying that he wanted an extension to the pause in fighting and that he and his staff and his team were working on something more longer term than that. How much influence then does the US have, given that, it seemed yesterday that Biden and Netanyahu were singing from completely different hymn sheets in terms of where they wanted to go after the truce?
I don't know if they were completely different in what they were saying. Their actions over the last 20, 30 years, the US and Israel have been very similar. They've worked very closely together. Biden is particularly supportive of Zionism and the state of Israel, but the core reality is that the US has given Israel almost everything it wants over the last 30, 40, 50 years or so, since after the 1967 war. But the consequences are now clear. Most of the global South and many parts of the enlightened global North are very critical of the U.S. and Great Britain. And the U.S. Is losing friends, losing credibility. More importantly for Biden, his Democratic Party is losing some support in the United States as an election year looms ahead. So, when Biden says in the long term, he means till the primary voting season begins in February. That's long term for the United States. The Arabs think in terms of historical legacies, that we've been in this struggle for 100 years and we're still struggling for Palestinian rights. And also there's other Arabs whose lands are occupied: Lebanon, Syria, other places. So this is a historic, possible pivotal moment, which requires real change from the participants. The Americans and the Israelis are very good at cartoon-like bravado, and we're tough guys, and we're going to beat the hell out of them, and we're going to destroy Gaza. We're going to turn it into a parking lot. I mean, that's his cartoon politics. And this is how these two societies operate. When it comes to the reality, Israel gave in to all the demands that Hamas made of it for these truces to take place and the prisoner exchanges. The entire world, virtually the entire world, is talking about Gaza and a two-state Arab-Israeli solution. This is quite extraordinary. So you'd have to really, if you put all this stuff into a computer and you say who's doing better, well, the Israelis are clearly dominant on the battlefield, and it's not really a battlefield, it's a destruction terrain. They're just destroying everything in sight, killing whatever they can. But in the political realm, the Palestinians have made significant gains, which we see in the statements and hopefully soon the policies of the United States and Israel. So you have to judge these dynamics on the basis of what people actually do rather than what they say. But it's important to keep in mind that we'll only get out of this century-long conflict if the transition to a peaceful negotiation responds to the legitimate rights and needs of both sides. This hasn't happened yet. The Israelis do not believe the Palestinians are full human beings who have the same rights as they do. The Americans have supported that position in their policies, in their statements. Only now has the American president started talking about two-state solution, and most people don't believe him because the U.S. has very little credibility. So there are a lot of hopeful signs, but there are also a lot of constraints that we have to to keep in mind. But the important thing is for anybody who's interested in this process should get involved in a serious, meaningful way to promote the transition to a serious negotiation so that the occupation ends, the Israeli apartheid policies end, the Palestinian resistance ends, because everybody has had their rights achieved. And this is hopefully an arena that we're moving towards. We're not there yet.
Rami, just to remind our viewers, we're reacting to the breaking news that the two-day extension to the truce between Israel and Hamas has just been agreed. I suppose, given that it is just a two-day truce, and there had been speculation that it might be a four-day truce or perhaps even longer, some people might be concerned that this might carry on going in dribs of drabs, 2 days here, 4 days here, and so on, until all of the hostages are freed, which, if we think that there were 240 hostages, perhaps 40 have been released already, that might give us an extra 20 or so days, and that after that, fighting might resume for real. What do you think there's any likelihood of that scenario taking place?
I doubt that we will see a situation in which the ceasefire keeps getting extended 1 or 2 days at a time, and all the Israelis and foreigners in Hamas's hands are released, and more Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails are released. I don't think that's going to happen. Hamas undertook what it did. Whether one thinks it's appropriate or not appropriate, that's a separate question. But Hamas undertook what it did and has pursued the policies of militant resistance that it has pursued for the last 25 years or so, precisely because it wants to give a big jolt, a big shock to the existing status quo in which Israel is a dominant occupying power supported by the US and Great Britain and other colonial powers. So it's not going to allow this ceasefire to just go on open-ended till all the hostages and prisoners are released, while Israel still has 7,000 or 8,000 Palestinians in jail. And they just arrested 2,000 in the West Bank in the last week or two. So the Israelis are a serial incarcerator of Palestinian civilians who are peacefully trying to express their anger and or even their joy. I mean, the Israelis are now saying that it is a crime for Palestinians to rejoice in public when a prisoner is released. I mean, the inhumanity of Zionism that we have experienced for the last century is now more evident to the whole world. And this is one of the reasons why so many people around the world are out in the streets demonstrating, even in the North, in Europe and North America and other places. The criminal behavior and the inhuman, barbaric attitudes of some of the extreme Zionists, some of whom are in power now, are now more obvious. We've always known this because we've had to deal with them for a century. And this is one of the reasons that they're worried. And this is one of the reasons why Israel is acting with such savagery, because it only knows how to use military power to crush the Palestinians into submission. But they're very good at bombing things. They're very bad at understanding the human and political dynamics that pertain in a situation like this. They've done this 4 or 5 times to Gaza. This is the most dramatic and extensive destruction they've done and killing. But every time they say they're going to get rid of Hamas and destroy its capabilities, it doesn't work, because Hamas is not something you can destroy. Hamas is an attitude of national cohesion and resistance and identity among Palestinian people. Not all Palestinians, including myself, would say it's okay to go and kill civilians. That's a separate question. And there are huge debates going on between lawyers about, is this terrorism? Is this justified resistance? What happens if you go into Israel and kill a soldier in Israel while soldiers implement the sanctions and the siege on Gaza? What happens if you go into Israel and you kill somebody in their home, and it turns out that they're a reserve officer and their gun and their equipment is at home. These are questions that are constantly being debated, and they really are a little bit incidental to the political dynamics. So the political dynamics are that you cannot crush a national sentiment, and the national sentiment of the Palestinians has increased and become stronger over the years, in line with the growth of the population. There's now about 13 million Palestinians around the world, mostly in the Middle East. And they've suffered a lot, and they continue to suffer. And they insist on trying to continue their struggle peacefully. Most of them, occasionally, some of them use violence, but most of it is peaceful. They insist on continuing their struggle to achieve their rights in a state alongside the state of Israel, which Palestinians have already recognized. So this is really an important element here that anybody who's interested in this issue or wants to be involved in it has to keep in mind. You can't get to the future and you can't get out of the present unless you understand how we got here from the past. The Israelis and the Americans refuse to do this because they understand that if you start examining what happened in history in 1917 and 1923 and 1947 or whatever, any point you want, they realize, the Americans and the Israelis, that you'll expose the political chicanery and deception and lies and the violent ethnic cleansing that was carried out by Zionist groups before the Israel state was created and after Israel was created. So they try any way they can to prevent a discussion of the past. And at the same time, they use all their possible means to prevent the Palestinians not just from resisting, but from being human. They don't want Palestinians to smile on camera. They don't want Palestinians on the West Bank to rejoice when their prisoners are released. This is extraordinary. There's really no other place in the world that we see this kind of savage behavior by an occupying power. But so these are all issues that are a consequence of the last century of warfare, and they can all be resolved. These are man-made issues, man-made conflicts. They can be resolved by man-made or woman-made resolutions. And this is the point that we should all hope to move towards, whether it's in the next week or in the next couple of months. The last point I'd make here is that it is very clear the United States cannot lead the process of negotiating a permanent peace. It has neither the credibility, nor the knowledge, nor the serious intent to achieve a just peace that sees Israelis and Palestinians as
Rami Khouri, I'm going to have to leave it there because we have our correspondent standing by. But thank you so much for joining us and for your insight and analysis there. It's much appreciated.